And what if I told you that there was an entire generation of stars who couldn't shine the way they deserved because of one single player? Not because of injuries, not because of tactical decisions, not because of a lack of talent, because of a phenomenon that, according to Arjen Robben, wasn't human. That's how a confession begins that not only shakes the ego of Europe's greatest footballers, but also redefines how we understand the Messi era. Because when a guy like Robben, who made defenses tremble in the Champions League, the World Cup, and the Bundesliga, admits that he and his colleagues had a problem called Messi, we're not dealing with a simple statement. We're facing a testimony that exposes the silent frustration of an elite who lived alongside the unreachable. Robben doesn't say it with resentment. He says it with a mix of admiration and resignation, like someone who accepts that no matter how much you train, no matter how hard you work, there is something you just can't touch. And that something, in this case, wears number 10 on its back and has a left foot that defies the laws of physics. Messi is an extraterrestrial, said the Dutchman. And he didn't say it as an empty compliment. He said it like someone trying to explain why so many brilliant players ended up in the shadow of a single man. Because yes, Robben won titles, scored memorable goals, was a star in giant clubs. But even he, at his best, knew there was a ceiling he couldn't break. And that ceiling had a name and a last name. Can you imagine what it must be like to prepare for a match knowing that even if you do everything right, there's someone who can destroy everything in 1 second? Robben lived it. He suffered it. He admired it. And he acknowledged it. Because facing Messi wasn't like facing a rival. It was like facing an anomaly. A player who didn't follow patterns, who couldn't be boxed in, who made no sense. Robben compared it to a human being you can read and an extraterrestrial you can't. And there lies the key. Because Messi wasn't just better. He was different. He was something else. Something that can't be trained or copied. And this isn't coming from a fan. It's coming from a guy who shared the field with Cristiano, with Xavi, with Iniesta, with Ribéry, with Van Persie. It's coming from someone who was at the top and still felt there was a higher step, reserved for one single person. Robben speaks of a silent injustice, of an era where many stars were pushed aside, not because they didn't deserve recognition, but because the spotlight was always on Messi, and not out of bias, but because Messi did things that forced people to watch, to talk, to replay. So what do we do with that? Do we celebrate it? Do we lament it? Do we ask ourselves how many Ballon d'Ors were lost because of him? How many front pages? How many awards? How many moments of glory faded into the background? Because if you really think about it, Messi didn't just win titles. He won narrative. He won protagonism. He won the right to be the center of everything. And even if that's fair because of his talent, it also had a cost for others. But here's the most interesting part. Robben doesn't complain. He doesn't ask for revenge. He doesn't look for excuses. What he does is recognize that in his era, there was someone who broke the mold, who made everyone else, no matter how good they were, adapt. Who made them play their role knowing the protagonist was already chosen. And that, far from being a criticism, is a brutal compliment. Because there's no bigger statement than admitting you couldn't compete, that there was no way, that it wasn't about effort, it was about reality. And if you think about it, Robben's quote is more than an anecdote. It's an X-ray of what football was over the last 20 years. An era dominated by a player who didn't just score goals, assists, and records. He made history. He forced other players, who in any other era would have been absolute legends, to settle for being supporting characters. And that, even if it hurts, speaks to Messi's greatness. Now then, what does that leave us as fans? Do we celebrate that dominance? Or do we ask ourselves what stories were lost along the way? Because while Messi flew, others walked. While he did magic, others did what they could. And while that doesn't diminish their merit, it does take away their spotlight. And in football, the spotlight is everything. So the next time you watch a Robben highlight reel, think about this. Think that this guy, who seemed unstoppable, one-on-one, who finished with elegance, who broke lines, also felt there was something he could not reach. And that something was Messi, the problem of his generation, the extraterrestrial who changed the rules, the player who made many stars except that their best version wasn't enough. And if we think about it coldly, what Robben said isn't just a headline phrase. It's a confession that, deep down, exposes an uncomfortable truth about modern football. that there was an entire generation who lived alongside excellence, and because of that, were never seen as such. Because when the standard is Messi, everything else looks smaller. And even if that's unfair, it's also inevitable. How do you measure a player who redefines what is possible? How do you compare someone who, instead of following the rules of the game, rewrites them every Sunday? Robben lived it from the inside. He suffered it firsthand. And he acknowledges it with an honesty not many dare to show. Because admitting that your career, as brilliant as it was eclipsed by someone else, is not easy. Even less when that someone, game after game, seemed to play with an invisible joystick, making the extraordinary look routine, turning the impossible into habit, and unintentionally forcing others to accept a secondary role. But there's something deeper here, something beyond football. Because what Robben suggests applies to any field where geniuses exist. When someone shows up that's several levels above, everyone else has two options: get frustrated or admire. And Robben chose the second. He chose to say, yes, I was part of a golden era, but I was also witness to something unrepeatable. And that, far from diminishing him, elevates him. Because not every day does a champion admit there was someone better, that there was someone who made him feel human in front of the inhuman. And if we look at it from an emotional angle, what Messi generates isn't just respect. It's a mix of awe, nostalgia, and gratitude. Because everyone who saw him play knows we witnessed something unique, something that can't be explained by stats or trophies, something you feel, something you live, something you remember. And that, as Robben said, makes you realize not all players are comparable. Some simply don't belong in the same category. So what do we do with this reflection? Do we use it to value Messi even more, or to better understand those who shared the field with him? Maybe both. Because if this story teaches anything, it's that greatness isn't always measured by what someone achieves, but by what someone inspires. And Messi, beyond the goals and titles, inspired respect, inspired admiration, inspired phrases like Robben's, not to justify anything, but simply to put into words what we all feel, that there was a player who changed the game, who elevated it, who made it his. And now I leave it to you. Do you think Messi made other stars less valued than they deserved? Or do you think his presence, instead of overshadowing, pushed everyone to demand more of themselves? I want to read your opinion in the comments. And if you like this kind of content that goes beyond goals and stats, subscribe. Because here, football is told with passion, but also with brains.